Welcome to another episode. Hopefully, you enjoyed that last bit of Gary Heidnick, Catherine Knight, and the Poppins sisters. I'm going to switch gears for you real quick because for this week, I'm going to be talking to you about the ghost topics, and that's going to be about haunted Fort Lauderdale. The question that I like to present is what's the history of Fort Lauderdale? When, where, and its purpose? I don't know. What do you think, Larry?
First of all, I don't know what the hell Fort Lauderdale is and what. Ain't that some sort of beer them people drink down there in Florida?
You're such an annoying prick. Fort Lauderdale has a history that dates back to thousands of years. It was inhabited by a Tequista Indian tribe for 2,000 years. It was a Native American. Hope you realize that. The Tequista people were hunter-gatherers who would gather fish, fruit, and vegetables on the trails of the New River, which exists in modern-day Fort Lauderdale, when Spanish explorers arrived. However, they didn't establish permanent settlement. The area wasn't claimed until the 19th century, when it was claimed by Spain, later on Great Britain, and thus inducted as the United States in 1821. Fort Lauderdale was established in 1838 during the Seminole War of 1835 and 1842, and Major William Lauderdale, who was an Army officer of that time during that war, he led a group of Tennessee volunteers along the Florida coast and established a fort along the New River. This fort was named Fort Lauderdale in his honor and served as a base of operations during the conflict of the Seminole Indians. After the war ended, the area remained sparsely populated until the late 19th century when the first wave of settlers arrived, thus being drawn by the new Florida East Coast Railway by Henry Flagler. The railroad started to develop, and it wasn't until Fort Lauderdale started to grow as a community and wasn't incorporated as a city until March 27, 1911. In the 20th century, Fort Lauderdale evolved into a popular tourist destination, particularly after World War II, and was known as the Venus of America due to its extensive canal system. But let's not forget that Fort Lauderdale is also famous for its beaches, as it's a highly tourist attraction among college students who usually like to hang around during spring break. And it's continuing to grow into the 21st century. So in regards to all this, with the history of the military involving with it and World War II and the Seminole War, it has a lot of history and it ain't just a city.
Damn shame, boy. So that means the true Americans are the Indians. How did I not know that?
But the Sawgrass Mall isn't just your typical place where teenagers go to buy clothes, including young adults with their friends. The GameWorks arcade, located in Sawgrass, has a story that resonates with a couple by the name of Greg and Natasha Lewis, and this story happened in 2010. Both parents of two twin 8-year-old boys. One day the family was at GameWorks, when all of a sudden they went into this particular video game booth to do racing. As they got into the booth, they noticed that it was the two parents, Natasha and Greg, and the two twin boys that were right in front of them. However, as they were playing the game, they noticed that there was an image of a little boy that was in the screen, staring back at them. The Lewis family, freezing in disbelief, noticed that the boy was about 10 years old and had a brown skin complexion. But it wasn't just the boy in the image that was odd, it was the wound that was on the side of his head that made them scared. In the image, there was blood and fat tissue, and the boy had no eyes. Greg and his wife were so confused that they started looking around outside the booth, thinking that maybe there was a little boy that was right next to them that needed help. When they looked, there was nobody there. Realizing that there was nobody physically right next to them that would fit this image, the family just ignored the image and continued to play. But trying to resume the gameplay of the image of this mysterious boy still kept appearing in the background. And this drove Greg and Natasha so nuts. They both started exchanging glances, and it upsetted them to where there was a random individual that was walking right past them. So they grabbed this individual's arm and asked him, "Do you see a little boy that's in the image?" The man replied, "I see no image. All I see is the game." Feeling confused, the man walked off, and Greg and Natasha started looking at each other and saying, "Wow, this is so weird." After that whole interaction, the boy vanished, and there was not a sight of him anywhere. Feeling frightened, the family left. About a week later, Greg came by himself and asked one of the employees if they had seen a little boy with a bloodied head staring right back at a family in an arcade booth that they were in a week ago. The employees looked at him weird and said, "No, there isn't any reports of a little boy staring back at a family. Are you nuts?" But Greg wasn't the only one that was nuts. As they were talking, there was a woman that was eavesdropping on a conversation. She worked there part-time, and she told Greg and the employee that months before there was reports from a bunch of teenagers and friends that there was a little boy staring back at them at the screen, not knowing who this little boy was. The woman never believed these teenagers until Greg vented his story out. Nobody knows who this little boy was. Perhaps he died during the construction during the Sawgrass Mills Mall during the 1980s. So maybe if you get bored one day, stop by GameWorks. Maybe you too might see this little boy and you can ask him who he was and how he died. Going a little far, we delve deep into another story. This one is called Soulmates Reunited Along the Shore. So there is a woman by the name of Gina, and she claimed to have had her conscious leave her physical body, also known as an out-of-body experience. The last thing Gina remembered was she was folding laundry near a laundromat that was located in Fort Lauderdale. So she started seeing these weird spots, and that's when she fell unconscious. Looking down from her feet, she sees a body laying on the floor. Immediately, she realizes that the body that she's staring at is hers. Instead of worrying, there was a sense of peace that encompassed her, and it was in that exact moment that she heard her name being called. Looking into the opposite direction, there was a man staring right at her. Gina noticed that this man was only being able to be seen from the waist up, and he was a good-looking guy, very handsome guy with thick, wavy black hair, and he had a very light glow around him. His cheekbones are well-defined with his olive skin tone, but the most intriguing look about this man, according to Gina, was his almond-shaped eyes and thick eyelashes. He looked at Gina directly with confidence, knowing that love existed between the two. And in his arms was a beautiful dark-skinned woman with eyes full of joy. All of a sudden, Gina returned to her body, and there were people helping her stand up, giving her a drink of water so she could rehydrate. Hours after that episode, she told her mother, who was a devout Catholic, about the experience. But Gina's mother didn't believe it. Gina believed that the dark woman in this mysterious, handsome man's arm was actually her in her past life. But Gina's mother became very concerned, and she told Gina that all this was just a hallucination and that she had to go see a priest. Over the next 30 years, Gina kept having dreams of this mysterious man, thinking that this was her soulmate of her past life. Some of the dreams would take place in Hawaii, with Gina dressed in period clothing. On one occasion, she saw the death of her soulmate, believing that his name was Kalakwa. On another occasion, he visited her in her current life, holding her hand. Gina said that the man was very kind to her and that she would find him along the Fort Lauderdale beach shore. Gina would go to the beach multiple times a week in hopes of reuniting with her soulmate. Gina died, however, in 2007 from an apparent heart attack. She was found by her roommate the next morning with a book clutched on her chest called Hawaiian's History. Stephanie, who is Gina's niece, ended up making funeral arrangement plans for her Aunt Gina, including with her sister and her mother. Gina, before she died, made a will that if she ever died, her ashes would be scattered in Fort Lauderdale Beach's shore, and so they were. Now, Stephanie had a paranormal experience in Fort Lauderdale Beach along the shore. One particular evening, she was praying about her late aunt, hoping that she was okay and that she had made it to the light, until one day there was a breeze that blew past her. This breeze was so strong that it knocked Stephanie's 5'9" body into the sand. Covering her balance, she sees a transparent figure of her late Aunt Gina. Stephanie could see that her late aunt's expression was so sad and desperate. During the exact moment that Stephanie got worried about her late aunt, she hears her aunt telling her, "I can't find him, I can't find him." 1 month later, Stephanie left Florida, and she was expecting her first child. She had been having dreams of her late aunt almost every single night, and before she could give up on life, she had a spiritual experience that she would remember. On one particular night, after a cold sweat, Stephanie was awoken by a presence at the foot of her bed. When she opened up her eyes, she noticed that her aunt was standing at the foot of her bed next to a handsome, dark, muscular figure. Although Gina's lips were not moving, Stephanie could hear her aunt talking to her telepathically. The air in the bedroom was much warmer than the temperature that it was outside. Then all of a sudden, a sweet smell of lavender encompassed the room, and Stephanie became more relaxed. The male angelic being next to her late aunt said to Stephanie, "You will have twins, a boy and a girl. Please name them Kalakwa and Kahumani. We choose you to bring us back." After this, peace fell onto Stephanie's soul. Afterwards, they both disappeared, and the next day, Stephanie told her story to her Hawaiian husband. Now, her Hawaiian husband found the story very interesting, and he thought that those were great, brilliant names for their future kids. Months later, the couple would have the exact babies that were predicted, a boy and a girl, both with dark hair and almond-shaped eyes. Stephanie noticed that these two toddlers that she gave birth to months later after this experience had such great love for one another. Coincidentally, like her Aunt Gina, along with this male angelic presence, these two toddlers have a love for Fort Lauderdale at such a young age, which makes it strange. This story makes you believe that reincarnation could have a factor with just one question. Do we get a second chance in life?
Yeah, the second chance is going into my damn Amana refrigerator and getting something to drink. That's my second chance.
Larry, have you ever been sober in your life? Do you know what water is? Well, there's one particular experience that Fort Lauderdale's attraction bar can say. The year was 1976, and 24-year-old Josh had a friend named Steve that convinced him to have fun one night. Steve suggested that on this particular Friday night that him and Josh would go have drinks at a bar called the Elbow Room. Josh eventually agreed, so he put on his famous going out bell-bottom pants along with him slicking his long black hair. Around 8:30 p.m. that night, the two friends had arrived. The two men decided to hang out on the second floor. In the crowd that was still, there was a beautiful woman who had a warm honey skin complexion along with eyes that were green as emerald. She had long waist-length blonde hair with a beautiful smile and a white party dress. Oddly, the party dress was a little outdated, but Josh assumed that it was just her style. The woman had locked eyes with Josh and started signaling Josh to come over and talk to her. Josh's first instinct, like a lost puppy, was to follow the woman. She led him down the stairs outside the open bar. Facing each other, Josh kept staring at her beautiful eyes. He just had this intense feeling that he couldn't shake his attraction away from her. Before Josh could say anything, the young woman brought her lips to his. According to Josh, this would be the most erotic kiss that he would ever received in his life. Next, they hugged each other for the next 5 minutes. He felt so much peace with her that he right then there knew that this was going to be the woman that he was going to marry. When he was getting ready to pull apart from her, Josh fell down to his knees and realized that the woman was gone, but he wasn't drunk. Why? Because his friend Steve had also seen the mysterious young woman who had led Josh away, and he asked what happened. Josh was too confused to tell his best friend Steve on what happened. Over the next couple years, Josh would frequent the Elbow Room in hopes of seeing this mysterious woman again. Unfortunately, he never did. He did hear stories, however, of this mysterious woman wearing a white 60s party dress, but nobody knew who this woman was. And they always said that they would only see this woman once, and that she would never be seen again by them secondhand. But another similar story lurks, but with a high school student. Larry, what are you doing? We promised to do this episode together.
Boy, you just keep on talking. I listened to you long enough without a damn beer. You know that.
Blanche Eli High School.
I don't know that good, man. I'm that studlite.
A teenage girl by the name of Stephanie was a student at this local high school located in Pompano Beach, Florida. Stephanie had a gift that she acquired since she was a little girl. She had the ability to see spirits, and it happened so much to where she couldn't distinguish people that were alive or dead because they were so solid to her. Being 16, she had no friends or a boyfriend. Now you gotta remember this was during the 1970s, so whenever there was a story about people seeing ghosts, they were labeled as mentally ill, so a lot of people had to keep it to themselves. On Valentine's Day, Stephanie's school held a prom night, and Stephanie was the only girl in her school that didn't have a date for the prom. Stephanie, not being affected on being lonely, still attended the prom hoping that she would get a guy approaching her. But sadly, nobody would. This annoyed and made Stephanie so sad. Near the end of the night, Stephanie was getting ready to go home. Sitting on the bleachers in the darkness, she felt a cold chill pass right behind her. Wondering the cause of this unusual presence, Stephanie looks up and sees an image of a young boy by about 17 years old offering his hand for a dance. This first thing that came into Stephanie's mind was, man, this is a good looking guy. So this dude's offering a dance towards the end of the night as I'm getting ready to go home? That's freaking awesome. And the boy said, "I'm Daniel," the guy said. "May I ask what your name is?" And Stephanie replied very timidly, "My name is Stephanie." After this, they started dancing, but during the coincidence, Stephanie noticed that people were looking at her strange. But at the time, Stephanie regarded this as just people being jealous, considering the fact that she thought that she was dancing with one of the most attractive boys in the school. After a couple songs, the boy led her back to the bleachers of where they first met. Stephanie was getting ready to tell Daniel something. Before Stephanie could get her words out, Daniel ended up cutting Stephanie off and said, "I need to tell you something, and it's something that you need to understand." Thinking that this boy is getting ready to reject her, she starts to get ready for the disappointment. But instead it became the fight of her life. The boy took Stephanie into the back room and showed board clippings of an old newspaper headline that said, "Terrible crash, car flipped over, and memory of family." But before she could get her words out, the boy mysteriously disappeared. Remembering that she had the most wonderful night of her life, she realized that she was dancing with the spirit of a young boy that had died in a car crash. To this day, the spirit of Daniel has not been heard or seen in these halls ever since then. But there has been one report of a spirit of an African American woman still roaming the halls of this school demanding civil rights. Coincidentally, the name of this school was named after an African American woman. Could this be Blanche Eli herself, still roaming around the school, watching over students? You decide. Oh, look who decided on who came back. Larry! So, did you finally get your drink?
Yep.
I bet you can't last 2 hours without a drink. I'll take that as a no. Alright, everybody. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Have a great day, and please like and subscribe.